Okay. All right. We are live from my basement. I always give everybody just a minute. Oh, and everybody's popping on.
He's here. He came.
All right. Hello, everyone joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. I will go ahead and get started since we've got folks here. We don't need to give folks a few more minutes. So welcome to One More Page Books virtual space. We're still doing a lot of the virtual events and also starting to do some in-person events. So still just really glad that we can connect readers and writers however that is these days. So I am just going to do a couple quick housekeeping comments for everybody and then introduce our authors, and then I'm going to step off and enjoy the conversation along with everyone else. So folks on Facebook, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the comments. If you're on YouTube, use the live chat. I'll be checking both of those, and we'll try to take some questions towards the end of the hour. So feel free to pop those in anytime. I'll be keeping an eye on them. Thanks everyone for joining. And yes, happy release day. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction of the authors. You guys probably may be more familiar even than I am, so I'll keep it very brief so that we can get on to the conversation. I'm going to start with Tess Sharp. She's the author of many books for children, teens, and adults, including the YA novel Far From You and the Jurassic World prequel, and is also the co-editor of Toil and Trouble, along with our other author, Jessica Spotswood, who is also the author of the fantasy trilogy The Cahill Witch Chronicles and contemporary novels Wild Swans and The Last Summer of the Garrett Girls. Caroline Richmond is the author of The Only Thing to Fear, The Darkest Hour, and Hungry Hearts. And she's also the program director of We Need Diverse Books. And there we go. And she's a mom. And finally, our fourth author tonight for the Great or Nothing launch is Joy McCullough, whose work includes YA novel Blood, Water, Paint and the middle grade novel A Field Guide to Getting Lost. And if I'm not mistaken, I think at least a couple of you all have more books coming out this year. So it sounds like it's a very busy year for a lot of people. All right. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and step off. And I can't wait to hear the discussion about Great or Nothing. Congratulations, everybody. Publication day.
Thank you, Amber. So the first thing we wanted to talk about was how this book came into being, which, like Toil and Trouble, actually, was sort of via Twitter. Someone had posted a question about what project you would work on if you could write anything, if you had the time and resources. And I had responded that I would love to write a World War II retelling of Little Women, in which Jo was queer and worked in a factory, and Amy was a nurse and was in Europe and met and tended to Laurie. And but I was daunted by the amount of research that would require. And the lovely Joy popped in.
Butted in.
No, wonderfully so. And responded and said, what if you co-wrote this book with 4 authors or with 3 other authors, and each person wrote a different March Sisters point of view? Would that feel less daunting? And could I be part of it? And I was like, yes, absolutely. At the time, my husband and I were doing foster care, and we had a little guy, and it was about 2 weeks before his court date, I think. And there was a question of like, would he be going home to his dad and being reunified, or would he not? And we wouldn't know until that day. And so I just could not take on organizing something right then. So I told Joy, like, yes, I would love to do this project, but can you please be the one to organize it? Because I do not have the brain power right now. And so she did. And she asked Tess and then Caroline to join us. And that is how this project was born. So do you all want to chat a little bit about what your relationship with Little Women was before this?
Yeah. So I had read it as a kid and really liked it a lot. And whenever questions about like, what fictional character would you want to hang out with, or like that would come up, Joe was always, you know, the one I would think of. And I watched the movies and adaptations and things and like them, but I wouldn't say that I was like a Little Women super fan. It was a book that I had read and enjoyed, and then when you proposed this, I went back and reread it again, and was just I had so many like memories of when I read it the first time that I had forgotten, but that, you know, were reawakened in the reading, and of course found so much more in it to connect to too. So that's me.
My introduction to Little Women was the 90s adaptation with Winona Ryder as Jo and Christian Bale as Laurie, and I adored them. I really connected with Jo because she was a writer and I wanted to be a writer. I was devastated when she did not get engaged to Laurie, and I thought that was a huge mistake. And I did not actually like Amy a whole lot. I thought, I was very much Team Jo as a kid growing up, and that movie left a huge impression on me. It's one that I watched many times and adored, and I really love historical fiction. But it wasn't until the new adaptation came out, the Greta Gerwig version in like 2019, that I kind of got back into the Little Women world. And I loved Florence Pugh's adaptation of her, just how she played Amy. I really felt like she made her relatable and someone you could understand. Even if you might not agree with everything she said and did, you understood why she did it. So it all was very serendipitous that when I was asked to write Amy, I was like, oh, that would actually be fascinating to delve into a character I didn't relate to at all as a kid, but as an adult, I saw another side of her. So, yeah.
Do you want me to go, Jess, or do you want to go? Whatever you want.
Oh, go ahead.
I will say that I am like a old lady. So my first exposure to Little Women was I want to say it's the 1940s version with Katie Hepburn, because I am old and love black and white film. And Little Women was like a really big thing in my family because my mom homeschooled us, and she loves Louisa May Alcott. And if you're here, Mom, hi. And so in a way, my mom is like a Louisa May Alcott fangirl. Like she's really obsessed with Louisa's life and stuff. So I was always around it and kind of around the myth of it and how Louisa felt about it in a lot of ways too. But I think that the first time I read it was probably like 9 during like the homeschool curriculum. And I just always loved it. I loved her boldness. I loved the sister relationship. And I've always really loved Marmee. I think because I'm so close to my own mom. And Marmee is such an interesting character because, you know, I think that she has a lot of rage in her at times that I think that as kids we kind of miss. And then when we revisit it, it's like, oh, I understand this better.
Yeah. And for me, I read the book. It's one of the first books I remember checking out of my elementary school library, because I think I was in 2nd grade and the librarian was like, "Are you sure you want this big book?" And I said, "Yes, I absolutely do."
It's so big.
And I
so big.
It's so big. I love it. There's so many beautiful
2nd grade. Oh my gosh.
Oh no, Justin.
Yeah. So
You cut out for a bit, Jess.
But now you're back.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I loved Jo, of course, because she was a writer, and I even then was writing stories. But I also really loved Meg because she is the oldest and sort of bossy perfectionist. Like she wants to follow the rules. I don't know, I read some of my own anxiety into her, I think. Which leads us into our next question, which is, what about your character really resonates with you the most? And I'll just continue answering. For me, I wrote a lot of Meg's anger and frustration and fear about the war and the fact that her sisters have gone off and left her in this too quiet house to have their own adventures, and she's left with Marmee, and a changed Marmee after Beth's death. And she's angry, and she doesn't really know how to deal with that because she's spent her life trying to be perfect and trying to be the one who always pastes on a smile and smooths things over. And so, yeah, I feel like I explored a lot of my own anger and fear and frustration about the pandemic into Meg's feelings about the war.
Joe and I have a lot in common. There's a very big thread of grief through Joe's arc, I would say. I really had to kind of zoom out because her story changes the most from the canon, I would say, probably because, she's queer in this. And so there is no Professor Bear. And so I had to really kind of look at that time in her life in the canon and like interpret it. And I was like, and I finally like came to the conclusion. I was like, okay, Professor Bear is a grief reaction. Because otherwise it didn't make sense to me. It's never made sense to me in a really big way. And so for me, I read a lot about grief, and I think that it was a predominant subject in my life, when I was around Joe's age. And, just as a writer, and that frustration of rejection that she has internalized, and to write through grief is really, really hard. And so while doing this, of course, the pandemic was raging. And so I think that it influenced all of our work in a lot of ways. I think that a lot of the pain sometimes comes from that, and really made it all the more poignant,
So I wrote Beth, and it was funny when we announced the book. I remember there was a comment on Twitter where someone said something like, "Oh, yay, Beth doesn't have to die." and that's a totally valid reaction. And people may write Little Women retellings where Beth has a great long life. That's fantastic. But we always knew, I don't even remember, but it was very, very early on that we said, Beth's dead at the start. That's so just, if anybody out there thinks Beth is going to be alive, she's not. She's dead from the start. And for me, it was really important because part of why I was really interested in writing Beth was that I live with chronic illness, and I had never written a character with chronic illness. And I didn't want the arc of a character with chronic illness to be that she's healed, that she's fixed, that she gets better. Because that's just not the arc for people, for many people, for some people, but for many people, you live a life and it's no less valuable because you can't do all the things that other people can do. It is the life that you live, and it still has value. And so I really wanted to explore how Beth made an impact and how she lived when she was alive, and how that sort of left a legacy. And through that was kind of working through some of my own, feelings about the body I'm in.
What I love about Amy in Great or Nothing is that she's very plucky. She's very practical. It's something I admire because I don't consider myself a super brave person. I overthink things and am overly anxious, but Amy is someone who just makes a decision and goes for it and is spontaneous, and she makes choices that I never would have. She dives first into a war zone, and she does some things that aren't quite legal to do that, while she's, 17 years old. And but that happened in World War II. There were soldiers and volunteers who might fib a little about their age so that they could fight in the war front because they believed so much in the cause they were fighting for. So it was inspiring to me to write a character who would just run head on into a foreign country, a foreign land, and just kind of adjust to it. So that's what I really enjoyed writing in her arc, was not only, diving face first into the war front, but also figuring out what to do when she got there.
Yeah.
Let's see. So how does your character differ from the original text or movies? I can go first.
Go ahead.
One thing I thought of is it was really important for me to showcase some diverse faces from Amy's point of view. She comes from a pretty, white middle class family background. Um, and the war brings her to a very international metropolis of London, where she's going to bump into a lot of different people from different backgrounds. So it was a priority for me to integrate some of the diverse histories that are happening in London at this time. So you see Amy meeting an African American soldier who is, being sent to the war front. She also brushes up against the small Chinese British community in London, which was really interesting to study because they are small. So it was a bit hard to do research on that. But that is one thing where she kind of veers away from the original Amy in Little Women.
Well, mine, Beth, in the book, we don't really get to see. I mean, this is true for everybody. Actually, is that we don't get to see from inside their perspective. That's something that we're all doing. And Beth in the book is sort of just there as an observer, but we're not seeing what she's observing. And sometimes most of what defines Beth is that she's sick. So because I was writing her as after she had died, she's still an observer and not able to directly interact, but I enjoyed exploring the ways that she felt that people wouldn't have expected her to feel it. She's critical of the way the father is. She's critical of them all, actually, in different ways, and it's with a generous spirit and a wanting her family to heal. But she in the verse, she's not holding back and telling them the things they're doing wrong in a way that she doesn't in the original. And she probably, even if I'd written her alive, I probably wouldn't have written her like that because it wouldn't have made sense. But there's a freedom to the fact that she's beyond now.
I just have to say that Joy's verse is so beautiful and poignant, and I think it made all of us cry. I know I definitely got very teary when I was reading it for the first time and the second
Mission accomplished.
So for Meg, one way she differs is that she's a school teacher in my version, and she is teaching down the hall. Before he left for training camp, she was teaching right down the hall from John, and has fallen in love with him in this sort of slow, steady kind of way that her sisters, don't really understand. They think romance should be this big, explosive thing. And what Meg has with John is much more steady. And she likes that. He's very dependable. He's a good listener. Things that I think would make them happy together in the long term, but, are maybe not as exciting and romantic as her sisters think the ideal of romance would be. And my Meg also has a sort of student that she takes under her wing who's also grieving Dorothy. And it was really fun to write that dynamic. I think it was a suggestion from my critique partner, Tiffany Schmidt, actually. But I loved the way that Meg got to explore her own emotions through seeing a younger student really be free with hers. Like Dorothy is someone who says what she thinks and sticks up for her friends and doesn't hide her emotions. And Meg actually feels like she can learn a lot from this younger girl. So I really enjoyed writing that dynamic. I know that as someone who works with kids, I work for DC Public Library. You can definitely, learn a lot from some of the younger people in your life.
Definitely. And yeah, Joy, I literally, when I was in the narration booth, I had to like very carefully not start reading the poetry after my chapters as I flipped to do my next chapter, because otherwise I was going to start crying. So I guess the biggest difference in my Joe is queer, you know, and I think that I would say that I probably, if you had asked me to do this and you had wanted her to be straight, I probably would have said no. I would have felt like unqualified. I still feel like I am the non-historical writer in this room. I'm a contemporary thriller writer. So I felt very flattered that anyone asked me to do it, but I also felt very intimidated and still do. But I thought a lot about sexuality angst, and there is not really any in this. There is, I would say that there is a kind of ahistoricalness to her discovering her sexuality, because as an author, I tend to not do sexuality angst. It's just not really in my makeup as a person. And so to kind of explore what was hampering her, which was actually her grief and not, you know, any fear of repercussions, I thought was kind of interesting to be able to do. And it really allowed me to dig deeper into other aspects of her and in her dynamic with her family, and how when things get tough, my Jo runs. You know, she has isolated herself completely from her family because she has had this revelation that through Laurie's proposal, she has realized that the person that she thought she was, nobody else is seeing her that way. And so in a way, she's having an identity crisis while also grieving. Like, Girls has a lot of heavy stuff to do. And for me, it was really nice because the plot line with the reporter that Jo falls in love with, who is working for Life magazine, and the cover story that they work on about Washington, about the workers of the factories, was really based on my own grandmother's experience. She worked in a DC war office, and she was a Life magazine cover model because they picked her out of, you know, the steno pool, and she got to, you know, be the girl about town. And so I based a lot of that story and that arc on her own stories from that time. And it was really nice to be able to revisit that and to kind of meld a little bit of me into Jo, I guess you could say.
So
next question. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna throw it
out. What kind of research did we do? I would say I read a lot of biographies of the WASPs, and I watched so many newsreels. I'm sure all of you did too.
I didn't do as many newsreels. A few. I did some like BBC, like old World War II footage. I read a lot about the Clubmobile girls. They were Red Cross volunteers. They were nicknamed the Donut Dollies. So in the book, Amy is a donut dolly. They drove around in these reconfigured trucks across England and France. And just they kind of followed the troops where they went, and they made coffee and donuts. They were there for camaraderie, to kind of give the boys a little taste of home and, you know, to get their spirits up. I'd never heard about them. And Jess mentioned at the beginning that she had originally thought of Amy as becoming a nurse. But as I was doing some more research, the Red Cross nurses needed to be 25, and they usually came in already trained as a nurse. Like, they already were working and had already gone to school. So my thought was like, well, that would be a lot for her to lie about. So I found a happy medium in that, you know, she could probably pretend to be a donut dolly. So I did a lot of research into what their days were like, what their clothes looked like. It was interesting to learn about how they actually made the donuts, which apparently didn't even taste that good. I mean, they were hauled around on like a truck, you know, and I also did research into the U.S. Army Air Forces, which was the precursor to the Air Force, because Laurie that's what he's doing in the war effort. So, but yeah, even though I've written quite a few historical fiction books about World War II, this novel really challenged me to learn even more about stuff that I had never even heard about.
Yeah, I researched a lot of fashion because May is a bit of a clothes horse. She makes her own clothes a lot of the time. And I was also exploring the difference between her and her sort of frenemy, Sally. And Sally has money, so what is the difference between the way Sally dresses versus the way Meg, who's making her own clothes, might dress? And when they go out, especially like how Sally makes these terrible little constant put downs about Meg and her clothes and everything, really, because she's a terrible friend. And so that was interesting. I also got to research Red Cross. Meg runs the Junior Red Cross at her school. So it was really interesting to research some of the things they did, like help run blood drives and, help sew comfort kits to put together to send to the soldiers, especially at Christmas time, things like that.
Well, I feel like such a slacker because I did hardly any research at all, but that was sort of because of the nature of how we did it. So the next thing we were going to talk about is what our co-writing process was like and what some of those challenges were. So I'll sort of dive into that and also give my explanation of why I didn't really have to research because you guys all did it for me. So we came in with like this really pretty clear pitch that Jess had to start was Joe goes to work in a factory. Amy goes off to Europe. Meg stays home. And I don't remember the point at which we said Beth's already dead, but it was real early. So we kind of had that. And we worked together to have an idea of what the general arc for everybody was going to be. But then we knew that part of the story was going to be that the sisters scatter after Beth's death, which made it easier on us as authors to step away then and write our own. It wasn't the kind of co-writing process where we had to send each other a chapter and then write our own chapter and then send the next chapter, where we were able to have a little bit more of an independent writing time, or rather you guys were, because I had to wait until I got first drafts from everyone. And then because my verse was all going to be sort of connective tissue. It was going to be reacting to one chapter and leading into another chapter. And so I couldn't do that without having your writing to work from. And because it's verse, and just because of the sort of ethereal, out of time character that we made Beth, it's really all about emotions, and so I didn't need to know what she's wearing because she's a ghost, and I didn't need to go into all those things. So like there would be things here and there, maybe something you guys would have written into your part that I wanted to understand or reference that I might then look up. But for the most part, I didn't have to do a lot of research. So, and then in terms of challenges, there was that for me was I had to wait. But
you had to stitch it all together.
I stitched it all together. So yeah, you guys all gave me your drafts of like your characters' arcs straight through. And I figured out the order in which they would go. And one of the challenges and one of the new things I learned that was different from how I usually do it is I learned Scrivener. I had tried Scrivener previously and failed. I am bad at technological change. I just write in Word. But I really had to be able to move chapters around easily and insert poems in between them and stuff. So yeah, I jigsawed it all together and used Scrivener for that. And then we had a whole, and we all read it and had feedback for each other to smooth things out, or two of us have a friend named Megan in it, or like we would but yeah, and then it went off to our editor. So that was kind of the process. So what do you guys want to add about what the co-writing process was like and what some of the challenges were?
Well, I know Caroline and Jess, you guys worked together a little bit on the scenes. Joe is so isolated. She's like actively dodging everybody's calls. So like I was in a little bubble, with Joe, basically, she does not contact her sisters until like the very end because she's on a grief spiral. But I know you guys worked together a little bit, didn't you?
The final chapter, because they're in the same room, right?
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, we kind of wrote our own characters' journeys, and then we found ways to stitch them together. But yeah, Jess Jess and I definitely had a Google Doc going of like, what should they say here? And she did most of the framing, and then I just kind of added a few lines of dialogue, and she did the heavy lifting on that one.
No, but it was so fun to be able to collaborate. I have not as much as Joy, but a little bit of a theater background. That's what my master's is, in theater history and literary management. And yeah, I just love the like collaborative nature of working with other people. It's something I really loved about doing my anthologies. And that was, I think, one of the most fun things for me, was working on, in particular, like one chapter that Amy and Meg actually get to interact in. And I could like leave little brackets and be like, okay, like this is my shot at her dialogue, but Caroline, can you rewrite it so that it sounds like Amy in your voice? Or like, can you add like what she would do with her hands, or like, her body language, that to make it feel like, coherent, not coherent, like that it fits the rest of the book, that it's like in tone with the voice that she'd established. And so, yeah, I thought that was really fun. I remember one challenge for me was because I love things to be like so organized. And I remember we were trying to figure out when Thanksgiving was and when Christmas was in our chapters, because originally the book was going to be set in the spring, and then for like logistical plot reasons for Amy and joining and going the Donut Dollies and going overseas, we changed it so that it would be in the fall of 1942. And then we were like, oh right, there's holidays there that would be like affecting them, that they would be celebrating. And especially for Meg, I was like, this would be huge for her emotionally, like the first holidays at home on her own with Marmee without any of her sisters is like so sad and emotional for her. And how is she going to like rally around this? So I was like, we need to know when Thanksgiving and Christmas are, and they can't be like, like Joe's chapter 4 and then Meg's chapter 8. Like that doesn't make sense. And so I just remember a lot of me being like, when is Christmas?
It was hard. I remember too, because we had all kind of set our Thanksgiving and Christmases in different chapters, and we had to kind of rework a lot of that.
But I know, and I think I messed it up a little bit because a lot of my chapters will like bleed into each other. So it's like the next moment instead of like, a week later, because I'm terrible. So like, I remember that it was. And then I remember I remember shaping it so that Christmas in my chapter happened during the letters, because I was like, I can't deal with it otherwise.
But yeah, we've had some questions on Twitter before of like, how did we co-write? But I would say for the most part, we worked independently, and we would ask each other, logistical questions if they arose. And then we would have to have some really long email threads sometimes about like stitching everything together. And there were a couple chapters or scenes where we had to plop things into a Google Doc so we can all see them in real time and make comments and changes. But other than that, I think what worked well was that we had 4 different POVs, and we just kind of wrote those as we would a normal book, but they were like novella length instead of.
Although after we'd gotten our edits and done our revisions, then we had the huge headache of we had 4 different documents that we'd each done our revisions
That's what I meant. Yeah, that was the document.
Bless our copy editor. Bless her.
Oh my gosh. So we had to put them all into one document for that revision, which was a nightmare.
I can't believe it didn't crash Word.
I mean,
it
did.
It did. I didn't have the final version on my computer, so
Jess and I were working on it, and it was a formatting nightmare. And so we sent that, but then when it was time for copy edits, we were like, we're each gonna just send our own, and you guys are formatting professionals, and you can handle it. So
yeah, I remember you sending it in, and it was like, be very delicate with it. It will likely break. So what advice would we give to authors interested in collaborating on a project?
Well,
so
I gotta say, go ahead.
Well, all 3 of you have edited anthologies. So I think you have a lot of experience working with other writers. And I have a lot of experience, as Jess referenced, I'm a playwright, and so I have a lot of experience collaborating creatively, but I hadn't ever worked with other writers on a book project, which it was really wonderful to be able to share that. But one thing that I think that people might be surprised to know is that we weren't all good friends before. Like I was like Twitter friendly, maybe a notch above Twitter friendly because we have the same agent, but like I didn't really know any of you well at all. And I think that picking when you're choosing who you might want to work with, choosing people whose work you really respect and love is it may be more important than just people you like or people you're friends with. You know, I've come to feel like we're friends, and I certainly like you, but that's not how it came together, because we were the right writers for this project, and we admired each other's work. So I think that's, I don't know, I think it could be dangerous to go into something with someone just because they're your good friend, because then, you know, it's business too, you know, and there can be clashes. We didn't really have any, but there could have been, you know, and you wouldn't want a relationship broken by a book process. So I don't know. That's just to say you don't have to be best friends with someone to co-write with them.
I think that's kind of a testament. One of the reasons why it felt so cohesive, even though we were off, you know, doing our own thing, was that, you know, we all really liked each other's writing and we knew it, you know. And Jess and I have worked together, but Jess basically guided me through the anthology process. I love you. With Toil and Trouble, because she had a lot more experience than I do, and she is a better editor than I am by far. She's the only editor who's ever gotten me to change an ending. But and I think but it is like it really is about really respecting everybody's time. Also, I also like, I am bad at certain things, and I try to be like, let everyone aware that I am bad at certain things, you know. And I will be like, I sometimes will be like, you know, disorganized a little bit, and I try to be aware of that and try to make up for it in other ways, because I can be good. I can be really good at, you know, I can be really good at promo. I can be really good at, if you discount the book, you can, I have all these ideas for all of that stuff, but sometimes I will not answer an email within 48 hours. Which I feel bad about. But I think that being realistic about your own weaknesses and strengths with your co-writers can be really important, because then, you know, another one could be like, well, oh, I'm really good at this, but I'm not so great at this. And when there's four of us, it's like we can really play off of each other, both in the narrative and just in the, you know, larger book business of the book. I also think it's really great to have all four of us having the same agent was really helpful. We love you, Jem. You don't have to deal with anybody else's ego. You don't have to deal with, you know, hurt feelings or being like one agent feeling like they're not, you know, the lead on it or anything. And that can be really helpful too, I think.
Though it is possible to do it with different agents, just so people know that if you know, have someone you want to write with, they don't have to be an agent mate.
This makes things a little easier.
Yeah. Just a little easier.
I would say for author collaborations, it helps for everyone to know what they're doing. You know, like we all knew we were in charge of one March Sisters story, that there would be some collaboration and kind of figuring out different timelines, but we all had our parts to play. I've actually co-written 2 other books like years ago. They're self-published new adult romances. Anyway, but we also had a very defined delineation of what we did. It was different in that, like, my co-writer wrote the skeleton rough draft, and I went in and like bulked everything up, because that's what we like to do. So that, even though that was different, we each had our roles and we knew what we were going into it. So I think that's really important at the outset, that you understand who's doing what. But then also communication, you know, you just have to be able to talk about, you know, if you're running late or if you hit a plot point that you maybe had agreed on, but now you don't know if it's working in the book, or I don't know, marketing, just all, you know, just having that open line. So kind of like what Joy said, it's not necessarily you need to pick your best friend. It's just someone that you could have open dialogue with.
Yeah.
I feel like you guys covered everything. What is left to say? Yeah, I think all of those things, respecting your co-authors, clearly delineating what each person is in charge of, being aware of everyone's strengths, and then like what they might not be as enjoy doing as much even. Some of us, like, I played around on Canva and made some images over the last couple of weeks. That is definitely not everyone's idea of a fun time. If you'd asked me like a year ago, it wouldn't have been my idea of a fun time. But I recently took a class on it, and now I'm like, ooh. So yeah, I think you guys kind of covered all of that. Do you want to talk about other historical fiction that we recommend? My library self loves book recommendations.
We lost Jess again.
Oh, no, Jess got frozen.
All right. Well, I'll jump in and hopefully she'll rejoin.
Oh, she's back.
Sorry, did I burble again?
Just a little bit.
You didn't make your recommendation yet.
Oh, okay. I was going to recommend another Little Women retelling, Bethany Morrow's So Many Beginnings, which is fascinating. It's set in the Free People's Colony of Roanoke, which I knew basically nothing about before I read the book. And in her version of it, the March sisters were formerly enslaved, and now they're living in this Freed People's Colony. And it's just a really fascinating take. I think they call that line remixes, so it's not even like a retelling. There's so much that's different, but it's just really fascinating, and explores an area of history that I knew basically nothing about.
I have the thing that I have loved the most in the last few years is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. Melinda is, a longtime fave, I think, of basically all of us, basically the world. Oh, but to see that book getting the due that it deserves has just been so rewarding and just so touching. And I'm so happy that it exists in the world. It's such a beautiful novel. Everyone should read it if they have not yet.
So I'm going to recommend two things that haven't come out yet but are coming soon. And one is called The Ghosts of Rose Hill by R.M. Romero, and it comes out, I want to say May. It's this spring, and it is not strictly realistic historical. It's there's a present day girl who goes to Prague to stay with like a great aunt, and she discovers this abandoned Jewish cemetery. And she starts to have interaction with some of the ghosts. And it's in verse, and there's some wonderful history to it, even though she's in the present. So it's really the sense of place and the stories that each of these ghosts have it's incredibly gripping. And then I'm also really excited to read The Most Dazzling Girl in Berlin by Kip Wilson, whose debut novel in verse was White Rose. She just writes fantastic historical verse my suggestions just happen to both be verse, but they're books that I just really am excited about.
I hope it's okay for me to recommend an adult historical romance, but that's basically been my jam throughout the whole pandemic is romances, because we have happy endings and we all need some happiness right now. One author I discovered during the pandemic is Joanna Schupp. I really love her Uptown Girls series. I would highly recommend them. They are set in like 1890s New York City, so amongst the glamorous, nouveau riche set, and they're just really they're really great. I'm pretty much a Regency romance person, but I love kind of branching out into a different historical period, but that still brings all the elegance and sophistication and pretty dresses,
Yes.
Her series is great. I really love the first one that kicks it off, called The Rogue of Fifth Avenue. So it's a great series if you're looking for a good, fun beach read. Oh, so the next question is, what are you working on next?
So that question is always so weird because what we're working on is something that'll come out in like 3 years. But so I'm just going to say, I'm going to cheat a little bit and say that in 1 week, I have a picture book coming out, which is actually also historical. It's about this woman who started a boycott on hats with feathers on them in order to protect the birds, because millions and millions of birds were dying each year for hats. And that boycott led to the founding of the Massachusetts Audubon Society. So her name was Harriet Lawrence Hemingway. And yeah, this book comes out next Tuesday. So that's my next thing out.
Oh, congrats.
Thanks.
Oh, that's such a cute concept. And didn't you discover her through research through another book?
Yes. So my middle grade Across the Pond, which came out about a year ago, and it's just now out in paperback, is about a contemporary girl who gets into birding, and she comes up against sexism in birding. And so I was doing some research about feminism as related to birding, and I came across Harriet Lawrence Hemingway and thought, that's a picture book. So.
The book that I'm finishing that I'm turning in tomorrow actually is my second Jurassic World book. And my next book that's coming out is the first in the Jurassic World series, Off the Grid, Maisie Lockwood Adventures #1. Lots of dinosaur antics. It'll be my middle grade debut, which is really exciting. I can't imagine a better way to debut than with dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And I have secrets galore still. Unfortunately, I have like 2 big secrets for 2023 that I can't talk about. And then 6 Times We Almost Kissed will be out in 2023 as well. And that's a YA romance.
I'm working on another historical. It's not sold yet, but it's set in 1947 at a former home for wayward girls. And there are 2 sort of complicated girls at the heart of it and a ghost. And I really am loving writing historical again. So Meg inspired me in this project.
Yay.
I'm actually working on a non-historical for the first time. All my books so far have been historical fiction or alternate history, but I was like, I'm tired of doing so much research. So the next book is set 100 years into the future. It is a heist book. It takes place in DC. It's kind of a mix of Six of Crows-y kind of a vibe. And it talks a lot about like climate change and how the world's going to be in a century from now. So that should be out in 2024. I'm still working on the rough draft, so might be later. I don't know.
Nice.
Should we open it up for questions?
Yeah.
I was just going to pop in and say that. And I do think I added a couple of links that are the event link, but if you scroll down on that, you'll see all the books that we mentioned of yours, including the ones that are still available to pre-order, are on that link. So if anybody's looking for those, that should be an easy way to find them. And one other thing I want to mention, and then we'll do questions, is that Caroline and Jess will be back with us next week for our Nova Teen Book Festival. And I will put a link to that in the comments as well. So we have 4 days of panels lined up next week, each with a different theme. Everything will be online, 6 p.m. Eastern. And then we'll close it out on Friday with Julie Murphy, with a conversation with her, with Amanda Queen from our store. So just wanted to put that out there. And I'll pop that link in just a second. Caroline, you're right. Your sister has a question.
My sister wants to know if maybe we would consider a Little Women retelling, but further back in time, like a Black Plague Little Women retelling. Thank you, Christy. I mean, I love historical fiction. There's not enough of like medieval, or I was saying even earlier, why not like ancient historical fiction? Little Women in Assyrian times, maybe Babylonian.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she's a writer, but I think she should take a stab at that. Like, I think that we were talking a little bit before, and Tess, you were saying that Little Women is so timeless that you can kind of set it anywhere and see how the different time period or setting sort of impacts the characters and their relationships, but they're so strongly rooted in who they are that you could move them into different things and then see what happens. I don't know that we are necessarily the ones to write that, but somebody sure could.
Christy will talk. We're going to do a Chinese historical retelling of Little Women.
Well, your sister, so it would be a great marketing ad.
We need to find 2 more sisters.
I don't think we talked about this. How old are the girls in your book?
We sorted this out in the beginning. Amy's 17, right?
Yeah,
I think that Joe is early 20s, I want to say. You had to be 18 to work in most of the factories, like the airplane factories. And one of the reasons I didn't make her a pilot instead was because the WASPs had a lot of qualifications, and you had to have a certain amount of flight experience to even be considered. So yeah, early, I would say probably 20, on the cusp there.
Did we ever specify with Meg? I mean, she's just older than Joe.
Yeah, I think Meg's 22 or 23.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. She would have had to have gotten her teaching certificate.
Yeah.
And I just
I didn't do much research, as I said. So there's a question here asking about our favorite research fact. But one of the few things I did research that made it into a poem was, and I don't even remember what took me down this hole, was looking at the origins of the word moxie and finding out that it was a soda, and could find no prior, like it was the word came from the soda, like it didn't predate the soda, and the soda sort of gave it the meaning it had, of fizzy vim and vinegar. So I learned about moxie soda.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Anybody else have a fun research fact?
Well, it wasn't fun, but the thing that I circled around over and over again, and it's in the book, is that the WASPs, when they died, the military didn't pay for their funerals and didn't pay to ship their bodies back. The families or the women themselves had to do it because they were a military organization. They were not militarized. And there was a lot of talk about sabotage, about the men in the and I'm like literally getting emotional thinking about it because it makes me so upset. The men at the Air Force bases, the pilots, they did not like the women being pilots. And there was talk of sabotage, putting like sugar in their plane tanks. And like, there are like documented like acts of sabotage against these women. And it was just like really horrifying to find out. Not really a fun fact, but something that I kept circling around while, kind of exploring this culture and subset of the military that I was not as familiar with. And I've read there's a lot of biographies about the WASPs. If anyone is interested, you can find them, lots of library discard books on book sites. And I really recommend, there's an entire book just written by letters by the women. And it's just a really amazing insight into their lives and time and the sexism that they faced and the danger that they faced just for being working women.
My one fun thing I did, on a little lighter note, was one of the fun things about writing something set in the 1940s and not in ancient times, is that I could go on eBay and buy magazines from 1942. Like I actually bought, I paid like a stupid like $70 or something for an old copy of Glamour, and it's like the one that Meg is reading in the book. It's like the December or November, maybe 1942 issue of Glamour. And so I actually got to read the articles, which was fascinating because they were very like, your job is to support your soldier and be cheerful and not have emotions. but the only pretty emotions. But then also the ads were really fascinating, and that was how I found out a little bit more about some of like the cosmetics she might be using or gifts she might be giving people for Christmas, that sort of thing, by seeing what was advertised in that magazine.
Cool.
I looked at, that's so cool. You need to like, I wonder what you're going to do with the magazine now, but you know, what a cool artifact to have. I looked at a lot of pictures of Clubmobile girls in doing research for the book, and I came across one picture in my many Google searches of Black donut dollies during World War II, and I thought it was so interesting because usually our image of Red Cross volunteers during World War II is of white women. And I really wanted to learn more about the Black donut dollies who served the Black troops who were serving in Europe. And I couldn't find a whole lot of info on them. Just information on the Clubmobile girls in general is a bit sparse. So that's something I'd love for a historian to dig into. I think there are just so many rich stories to be told, and to shine a light on these incredible women who I don't want to get forgotten in history, you know. They were out there, so I'm really hoping one day I can read a book about them.
Great. We only have a few minutes left, but I love this question because I'm very curious as well. Do you have a favorite scene that you or someone else wrote for the book?
Well, Jess was talking earlier about how Meg has a relationship with a young student in the book, Dorothy. And there is a scene, I don't want to give too much away, but I'll just say that some plates are smashed. And that is one of my favorites. And I had the really wonderful job that I got to write things that were reacting to everyone's. So I wrote a poem in reaction to the plate smashing. So that's one of my favorites.
The plate smashing is my favorite too. It's so memorable. I also love all of the scenes with Laurie and Amy. I've got to say, Caroline, you made me love Amy March so much, and I never
yay. Redemption for Amy.
Exactly, like justice for Amy. Like no, like I feel like I never really got them until you wrote it.
Oh,
yeah, me too.
Yeah, the smashing the
like cues from also. Florence and Timothy. Right? They're definitely yeah, the ones I envisioned when writing it. So thank you. That means a lot. I haven't written much romance since my debut in 2014, so this was my foray back into like kissing scenes and falling in love. So it was a lot of fun, especially we all wrote this during the pandemic, you know, like to kind of, even though we were writing this book about World War II and there was so much turmoil going on, it was such a joy to share this with all of you and to, you know, write from these beloved characters' perspectives, but in our own way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was going to end there, but one more question came in, and I think we have to answer that one too. Any other classics that you'd like to reimagine?
Well, Winnie the Pooh has come into the public domain. I don't know if that's quite our brand, but I just have to note it. I have loved doing adaptation, and I could definitely see doing it in the future, but I don't have any like specific project in mind yet.
Same.
Yeah, I'll have to think on it. That's a really good question.
I think this one might be my lone wolf. It was very much I'm like the outlier here, like the outcast in terms of like, I don't write historical fiction. I don't normally write retellings. I usually just kill people. But it was, I feel like because of that, it makes it so much more special to me. And like, it has this special place in my heart. It's the era that I love, that I obviously, I'm like literally wearing a 1940s shirt right now. You know, it's the clothes that I love. I associate the era with my grandmother. I'd love to write something in the 1940s again, but I think it might be beyond my ken a little bit.
Well, you could redo Edgar Allan Poe or something.
Oh, I thought of one. I don't know if anyone is really familiar. My sister would know, but growing up in a Chinese household, We heard a lot of stories about the Monkey King. It's a very, very famous legend, myth coming out of China. And I thought it'd be really cool to kind of retell that. You know, I don't think a lot of Westerners are super familiar with it, even though it's like really big in China. But I always felt kind of ill-equipped because I mean, my Chinese is bad and I don't know. But I don't know, maybe we could set it in America or something. So
Cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, I've enjoyed this hour, so thank you all very much, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Authors, if you want to hang on for a second after I close it, you can take a look at the other comments so you can see kind of who was here and who's saying hi to everybody. So, but everyone, thank you again. Use the links in the comments to find more books and to sign up for Novatine next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you.